John Durant, the author of the forthcoming The Paleo Manifesto that's out this fall. He studied evolutionary psychology at Harvard, was president of the Harvard Libertarians. He's a very smart and accomplished fellow, and this is his first PorcFest, and he's dived in full steam. And he signed up. He's doing the Barefoot running. He's doing a bunch of sessions, and we're just very pleased to have him. Without further ado.
Yes, it's great to be here for my first PorcFest. As president of the Harvard Libertarian Society, I mentioned the other day, I ran a laissez-faire administration, which means I got nothing accomplished. So didn't do very much. But today I was going to talk about the paleo diet, or primal as some people call it. A lot of libertarians have heard of it or do it or are interested in it. How many people here would say that they try or eat paleo or primal? All right, so a decent number, maybe 20, 30%, something like that. So what I'm going to do today is I'm going to keep my talk fairly short to give a brief overview of the core principles, why it works to address a lot of chronic health conditions, and then open it up to Q&A if people have more specific questions about implementation or specific health issues, and that can be effective, and we can have more of a conversation. My quick backstory is I ate like a completely average American growing up, and more or less my health was fine. I actually didn't have many health issues, and a lot of people go through childhood through adulthood in pretty good health. Like many other people, my first full-time desk job out of college, it seemed like my metabolism slowed down in a big way, put on about 25 pounds, and my energy was just up and down. I didn't really care about the weight so much. That wasn't a big deal. But I was just spiking and crashing. And when I was down, I wasn't just low energy. I was also pessimistic and a little bit anxious. And when I was high energy, I was more confident. So it wasn't just high and low energy. It really felt like who I was as a person was changing based on my diet and what I had eaten that day. So when I started to look into ways to be healthy, there was just mass confusion. There are all these different standards that the government promotes, that companies promote, that individual people promote, low fat, low calorie, vegan, vegetarian, natural, organic, just all sorts of stuff. So, and then there are all the different fad diets that people are on, whether it's Atkins or doing the master cleanse, and it's just mass confusion. It's mass confusion, and it's no wonder that a lot of people look at the whole mess and say everything in moderation, because it's a way to keep your sanity under the onslaught of all this guilt-inducing health advice on the one hand and tons of junk food on the other. So I didn't want to fit into a bathing suit. I just wanted to feel healthier, and I had studied some evolutionary psychology in college. And so when I came across an approach that took an evolutionary view at the human diet, it immediately clicked. You know, if you go to a zoo, some of the top zoos these days, the approach that they take to keep the animals healthy in captivity is they look at what the species eats in the wild, they look at its natural habitat, and they mimic key aspects of the animal's natural habitat. They keep the penguin house cold. They feed horse meat to the lions. They feed plants to the gorillas. And this same general approach can be used by human beings to stay healthy. If we look at what humans ate in the wild for millions of years before the dawn of agriculture, that's probably a pretty good rule of thumb for how to be healthy today. So what did humans eat before agriculture? We started farming about 10,000 years ago. People domesticated plants. You get wheat, corn, soy, things like that. We domesticate animals, cattle and pigs and sheep and goats and things like that. So the two big ways in which the human diet changed about 10,000 years ago, that's only about 400 generations, was the huge increase in eating grains and legumes like wheat, corn, and soy, and then the rise of dairy. I don't know if anyone has ever tried to milk a wild animal, but it's not easy. You need domesticated animals for that. So just by taking this long historical perspective, it doesn't tell you exactly what's healthy, but it does give you a pretty good sense of, okay, what foods have we been eating for the longest period of time? So it's a pretty good heuristic to get smart about health pretty quickly. Now, if you look at any population of wild animals, they're not perfectly healthy. I mean, they get sick, they get wounded, but what you don't see are chronic health conditions like obesity, diabetes. Wild animal populations have much lower cancer incidence rates than humans do, and a lot of these suite of health conditions are referred to as either metabolic syndrome or diseases of civilization. Because when colonial missionaries would go to different parts of the world and look at indigenous populations, they found that they were almost entirely unafflicted by a lot of these conditions. They had relatively good teeth. They weren't overweight. They didn't have diabetes, and they looked relatively strong and healthy. When you compare a paleo or a primal diet to the conventional health wisdom, there are some points of agreement and there are some points of difference. The general points of agreement are around industrial processed foods. It's pretty clear that the human body is not well adapted to digesting and metabolizing large amounts of Coca-Cola. If you drink 15 Coca-Colas a day, that is going to put you on a pre-diabetic path. Over a few years. And there's really not a lot of controversy around that, and the human body just isn't well adapted to such high levels of high fructose corn syrup. So the area of agreement are these industrial foods that really didn't enter the human diet in any quantity until about 250 years ago. If you actually go and look at the British population, they were the first to go through the Industrial Revolution in the 18th century, and a lot of these health problems appeared first in large quantities in the UK. So British folks have sort of this funny reputation for not having the best teeth. Well, that reputation for having poor teeth stretches back about 250 years, because the British were the first people to have large amounts of refined sugar in their diet, and it did a number on their teeth. So that's not something just from the last 50 years. That's the last 250 years. The refined flour, sugar, and then eventually things like Crisco, late 19th century, margarine. All these foods were novel additions to the human diet, and they were cooked up by essentially central planners, corporate food engineers, who thought that they could centrally plan food better than a decentralized process, evolution by natural selection, over a very long period of time. And they couldn't. I mean, the seminal example of a failed attempt to design healthy food is infant formula. And for a century, there have been all these attempts to try to make infant formula as healthy as a mother's milk, and they failed time and time again. First in sort of what sort of vitamins and nutrients to put in there, and then more recently, over the last decade, they've realized the importance of beneficial bacteria, antiviral agents, different hormones. It's far more complicated than a few nerds in white lab coats at Nestle could ever come up with. So those are, everybody sort of agrees that a lot of these foods that entered the human diet about over the last 100 to 200 years aren't so good for you. And you can become healthy. A lot of people can become healthy just by removing some of these foods in large quantities. Refined sugar, refined flour, frozen pizza, right? Coca-Cola. You cut those things out, and for a lot of people, that's enough. That's enough. You start eating maybe like how Michael Pollan recommends. I don't know who's familiar with Michael Pollan, but he's sort of the foodie in chief and has written some best-selling food books. And his basic recommendations boil down to cut out industrial processed foods, don't eat anything that your great-great-grandmother wouldn't recognize as food. And that gets you a decent part of the way. The problem is your great-great-grandmother also wasn't that healthy either, right? She had health problems, but she didn't talk about them at the dinner table because people actually had a sense of propriety back then, and so didn't share it or blog about it. But if you take one step further back, and you go 10,000 years ago, that's where the conventional wisdom really starts to diverge from a paleo or primal diet. Because if you look at the USDA food pyramid, the United States Department of Agriculture, which is heavily influenced by agricultural lobby, the agricultural lobby, the base of the food pyramid is grains. So the food that the government is recommending people eat in the largest quantities basically was not eaten or eaten in any sizable quantity until about 400 generations ago. It's pretty shocking when you think of it like that. And here's the problem with different types of seeds. And when I say seeds, I'm using the word a little bit differently than how most people use the word. Most people think sunflower seeds. I'm using it as a broader category to include grains, legumes, beans, seeds, nuts. These are all the reproductive organ of the plant. And from a biological perspective, the plant doesn't want animals or insects to come along and digest the seed, because then it doesn't reproduce. It doesn't make it into the next generation. See, the funny thing about plants is that they can't run away from you, right? They're stuck in the ground. So the way that they defend themselves is to either put a shell on the outside of the seed, or a casing that makes it difficult to digest, or they put a lot of toxins and poisons in the seed. So apple seeds have trace amounts of cyanide in them. You don't want a pet rabbit to eat apple seeds or it'll die. Peach pits, wild almonds have cyanide in them. They're poisonous. You really do not want to go wander in the wild, and if you see any seeds, you do not want to eat them. It's a bad idea. And it's because the plant protects them. So this paleo-primal perspective basically is skeptical of diets that are heavily based in seeds, because when you eat them in large quantities, they cause a lot of health problems, and can damage the lining of the stomach, and then all sorts of health problems are related to a damaged digestive tract, whether autoimmune conditions or depression, or diabetes and obesity. So basically, the recommendations for eating paleo or primal are as follows. And there are variations. There are different tribes of this, and people argue over it, and that's fine. It's good that there's variation and people experimenting with different approaches. But basically, industrial processed foods are out in any large quantities. And that's where it's same with the conventional wisdom. Where it differs primarily is on seeds, grains, legumes, beans, and then excess amounts of nuts or seeds, sunflower seeds, things like that. Those are basically out, or at least initially. And then dairy. People remove dairy from their diet usually initially when they start, and then a lot of people find, depending on their ancestry and their personal preferences, that they actually do fine on full-fat fermented dairy. None of this low-fat crap, excuse me. No skim milk. Skim milk is basically sugar water. That's been fortified with calcium and vitamin D. But there's some variation where some people incorporate things like butter or grass-fed butter or raw milk or heavy cream or some types of cheeses or things like that, depending on their ancestry. About 35% of people in the world are lactose tolerant. They have what's called the lactase persistence gene, and they descend from herding populations that domesticated cattle, and dairy and milk is a very nutritious and good source of calories, and so it became very beneficial to be able to digest lactose. But the majority of the people in the world can't even digest lactose, so if they have dairy, they have to eat it in some type of fermented form where the lactose gets destroyed or converted into something else. So that's basically avoiding industrial foods, cutting out large amounts of seeds and grains and legumes, and then people have variation on their approach to dairy. And then, okay, so what do you eat? Well, seafood, meat, beef, lamb, pork, chicken, ideally coming from animals that themselves are eating their natural diet. And there are a bunch of different reasons for this, and we can go more into that into the Q&A if you want. That's one difference. People start to eat nose to tail more. A lot of folks today, including myself, my entire life, I basically ate muscle meat. But liver is a profoundly healthy food, provided the liver comes from a healthy animal. Organ meats have tons of nutrients in them. If you actually look at, say, like wild lions or a lot of wild carnivores, when they make a kill, they don't go for the muscle meat first. They go for the organs first because they have an instinctive understanding that these are the most nutritious parts of the animal. But we've sort of reverted to only eating a few parts of the muscle. So using bones, making bone broth soups yourself is a great way to get nutrients. When it comes to cooking, people will cook in traditional fats and oils that people have been cooking in and using at a minimum for thousands of years, but ideally for much longer. So what is that? Cooking with real animal fats, tallow, lard. It's like shocking for people to hear that, but yes, I'm recommending that people eat and cook in lard. Coconut oil is amazing. Olive oil, people have been using olive oil for a long time. The oil, unlike many other vegetable oils, the oil is pressed from the flesh of the olive, not from the seed, and that avoids some of the problematic issues that face a lot of these modern industrial oils that people cook in now. Canola oil. Canola oil came into existence in, I think, about 1978. It was originally called rapeseed oil. Apparently, the marketing gurus in Canada decided that was not going to sell very well, so they changed it to canola oil, which stands for Canadian oil, something like that. So we've dramatically, so in terms of cooking using traditional fats and oils, I'm going to pull up a few other recommendations here. Stop counting calories. One of the great things of going paleo and primal is people don't count calories. And counting calories doesn't work very well. It can work for a time if you're really trying to use discipline to focus on what you're eating and paying attention. But counting calories on an ongoing basis for the rest of your life is no way to live your life. It is a waste of time, and it makes people neurotic and crazy about food. And so it's a healthier, you've got to have a healthy outlook to food as well. And part of that means not getting obsessed with random numbers or nutrients to the point where you're not even enjoying the food and become neurotic and crazy about it. You know, there's no wild animal that can count calories. There's no example, really, of a species that has effectively used calorie counting as a way to lose weight and get healthier. However, all these wild species, what does work is eating the types of foods that their metabolism is adapted to, and also having sometimes some periods of hunger and scarcity and movement and a healthy lifestyle as well. Meat, seafood, roots and tubers, leafy vegetables, eggs, fruit, nuts, some nuts in smaller quantities. And some of this is going to vary based upon your goals. If your goal is weight loss, then going more low carb may be effective. If your goal is trying to get pregnant and you're already at a comfortable weight, then maybe you need to eat a little bit more. Maybe you're restricting your diet too much. If you're trying to put on muscle, then there are going to be other recommendations. So there's a lot of variation here, and it's good that there's variation. This is not the cult of paleo. It's not the religion of paleo. And even if you try it for 30 days or a month or two and then decide that you want to add in some other foods and you tolerate them fine, and you don't even want to say that it's called paleo, that's fine. That's okay. You don't even have to name your diet. You can just, or you can give it or it can be customized. It's a diet of one. It's your diet. Give it your name, trademark it, and write a diet book about it. Well, actually, I don't recommend that. That's no fun. Follow ancient culinary traditions. If people have been cooking a food in a particular way for a very long time, it would be idiotic to think that we can just go in there and do it better somehow. You know, we are learning the traditional wisdom that is embedded in things like fermentation. Turns out fermenting grains is actually a way to make them healthier. Fermenting dairy often gets rid of lactose, which many people can't digest. So if they've learned that spices have antimicrobial properties, so the reason why ethnic cuisines around the equator are so spicy in part is because dishes spoil faster around the equator, pathogens are a greater risk, and so adding spices was a way of killing a lot of these viruses and bacteria. And meat dishes tend to call for more spices than vegetable dishes. So there's often a lot of embedded wisdom in these ancient culinary traditions that we would be foolish to ignore and just immediately try to re-engineer and think we can do better. So eat fermented foods, sauerkraut, kimchi, raw foods, sashimi, ceviche, tartare, make broths and stocks, traditional fats and oils. Time-honored superfoods, things like liver or seaweed or eggs, and the yolks of eggs are the reason why they're considered prized foods by so many cultures around the world is because they are nutritious. They have different vitamins and nutrients that in higher quantities that are very beneficial. Small oily fish, sardines, mackerel, things like that. And then when it comes to, I'm going to wrap this up in a second, get to Q&A, but when it comes to beverages and what to drink, you can sort of take a similar approach as to food. Industrial beverages that didn't exist until the last 100 or 200 years, generally avoid those. Be skeptical that they're going to be good for you no matter what they say on the label. The more claims on the label, the more you should shy away from that and be nervous that it's not actually going to be good for you. So things like Coca-Cola, the latest energy drink, which is just sugar water, a lot of juices are just sugar water, skim milk, sugar water. People really like to drink sugar water. Generally avoid those. Now, if there's some beverage that people have been drinking and enjoying for a much longer period of time, say coffee or tea or wine or beer even, or other types of alcohol, then it's sort of up to you, but if you'd like, enjoy them in moderation. If you descend from an indigenous population that hasn't had alcohol in the diet until very recently, it's probably a bad idea to drink alcohol because you'll be more likely to get alcoholism or fatty liver disease. If you come from a population from the Middle East that has been drinking alcohol for 10,000 years, well, it was your ancestors that got alcoholism and died, and now you have the genes of people that didn't get alcoholism quite so much. So maybe moderation is a little bit better in those areas. And that would include milk, but I would say eat it in its full fat form, closer to the raw milk, the better. And then when it comes to the drink of choice of the Paleolithic, water, drink it when you're thirsty. You know, this notion that you have to go drink 8 glasses of water a day and shove it down your gullet even when you're not thirsty there is no evidence to support that as beneficial. Zero. Nothing. Your sense of hunger and thirst are remarkably sophisticated mechanisms that work if you are healthy and if you are eating and drinking the types of foods that the body is adapted to. I mean, these are incredibly sophisticated mechanisms. Your sense of hunger and satiation isn't just a function of calories. It's a function of your body's needs, whether you have micronutrient deficiencies, your energy levels, your energy stores, how active you've been recently, how much sleep you've been getting, whether you're pregnant or not, whether you're trying to get pregnant. All these different things are tied into our hunger and thirst mechanism, and they work when you have the right inputs, when you put the right sort of stuff in your body. So it's actually a very liberating feeling to start to trust your body again, and to listen to what it has to say, and have that information be correct and right, and you can follow that, and then you can just sort of follow your gut, really, and stop having to pay attention to all the nutty, crazy health wisdom out there, or not health wisdom, but orthodoxy out there that is driving a lot of people nuts. So I'm gonna stop my talk portion there, and if people have questions, they can come up to the mic, or we can get a microphone passed around. Please speak directly into the mic so that we can get the recording, and the video will be better. We've got about half the time for Q&A.
So for someone who's thinking about a vegan or vegetarian diet, what would you have to say to them?
The question was, for someone who is thinking about a vegan or vegetarian diet, what would I have to say to them? Well, first of all, people are clearly free to choose whatever diet they like, and you're the ultimate decision maker. If something works for you and you like it, and for either health or ethical reasons, it's for you, great, more power to you. The one problem that I have with veganism and vegetarianism is just because you're not eating animals doesn't mean you're necessarily eating healthy foods. I mean, you talk, it's sort of a running joke among vegans, but a lot of vegans know like which candy bars are vegan or not, or you know, which processed foods are vegan or not. And so if you end up eating bowl after bowl of pasta or a cup of noodles or something like that and some candy bars, I mean, that's a god-awful vegan diet. And whoever does that, their health would suffer. I do tend to think that the optimal way to eat is to incorporate some types of animal foods, because you can't get vitamin B12 otherwise, perhaps by supplementation, which is what some people do. There are lacto-ovo vegetarians who are incorporating dairy and eggs. There are pescatarians that incorporate fish. I think all of these are great ways to sort of be a borderline vegetarian. And then if you do actually do it, like full on no animal foods, then I would probably recommend the book by Brendan Brazier, which is called Thrive, which recommends a high diversity of plant foods, which is really important, because if you eat too much of any one plant, whatever toxins that plant has, naturally occurring toxins, organic pesticides to keep away insects and herbivores, you minimize the toxicity by having a diverse diet. So go for leafy vegetables, roots and tubers, and take a look at that book. However, I wouldn't recommend that for anyone who's trying for optimal performance, trying to get pregnant, having a healthy pregnancy, or any moment where they're really using their body intensely.
So you mentioned when you said...
Can you speak up a little bit more?
You mentioned earlier that if we want to modify it to have a diet of one, and then you said, and then write your own book. And then you caught yourself and said, I wouldn't recommend that. I follow your blog sometimes, and I noticed you actually have a book in the works, more related to the process of writing a book. And I know there's some panels with Taryn Loop about that. Can you maybe speak to what made you catch yourself? Was there an issue in dealing with a writer? I know you worked with a writer that sometimes the ego and hubris of the writer would get involved, and there's maybe some ego tension where you're the guy who knows paleo, and the writer just knows writing.
Evan's trolling me slightly. Thank you for the troll question. I actually had the great pleasure of working with Michael Malice on this book, who's also giving a talk on North Korea. Is it tomorrow? On North Korea tomorrow, which will be excellent, so I recommend you go. And it was fabulous to work with him. The reason why I caught myself in terms of a diet book, first, I don't like the word diet. Because it has so many negative connotations with so many people, because so many people have tried diets that have failed. And the word diet sounds restrictive and limiting, and I don't like those connotations either, and I'd rather take a point of view that is the long view and to make how you eat an ongoing lifestyle where it doesn't require discipline. Nobody is disciplined all the time. You can be disciplined for a month, you can be disciplined for a week, but nobody is disciplined about exactly what they eat on an ongoing basis unless they're OCD and neurotic. And I don't want to be, that's not how I want to live. So you've got to find ways to turn a diet into a lifestyle. And that usually means making it meaningful in some way. Okay, maybe you have an old family cookbook and you make meals that are distinctive to your lineage or your culture. Or it's meaningful to eat healthy if you're pregnant or breastfeeding a child. Or it's you host dinners and you make food yourself, or you support a local farmer that is raising animals the way you want it. So all those ways, all those things are ways of looking at food that isn't just about how many vitamins are in it or how many calories or whether it's going to make you optimally healthy or not. It's just about making it part of your life and meaningful where you can integrate it on an ongoing basis to what you're doing.
Forgive me if I missed it, but I
You're
noticed...
forgiven.
Okay.
As someone who looks like a certain famous Jew,
the best show
I have
ever, yeah. But I noticed you talked a little bit about alcoholism. One thing, what do you mean by alcoholism specifically, into what kind of impact do you think it is? Like, what is the general paleo view on alcoholism specifically?
I have not studied alcoholism at depth, so I can't go into too much detail. But basically, people develop a dependency on it to where if they stop drinking alcohol, their body goes through a pretty serious and unpleasant withdrawal process. And a lot of species in the wild cannot metabolize alcohol at all. There are a few primates that can, chimpanzees, and maybe a couple of the other great apes can, and the idea is maybe some fruit. A lot of them are frugivores. Fruit would fall to the forest floor, ferment naturally, and it became beneficial to be able to metabolize that. So we do have the ability to metabolize alcohol. There are a lot of studies out there showing that moderate alcohol intake is moderately beneficial. They're talking maybe a glass of red wine every other day or something like that. You know, the reason I think that probably moderate alcohol intake shows some moderately beneficial effects is because alcohol also acts as a blood thinner, and a lot of people have different types of heart disease where a little bit of a blood thinner can be beneficial. But I think you can be optimally healthy without alcohol at all in your diet. And alcoholism is just a bigger issue for peoples who haven't had alcohol in their diet for very long, like indigenous folks. I mean, when firewater came, it just ravaged, just like their immune systems of indigenous folks weren't adapted to the pathogens that Europeans brought over. Their liver and their body wasn't adapted to alcohol as well.
When you're saying limiting your intake of seeds and nuts, do you see any difference between the shelled ones and unshelled, and things like hemp seeds and walnuts and almonds? And then also, do you know of any negative side effects of consuming lots of leafy greens? I've read some things online saying that it could lead to kidney stones and stuff like that. So
in general, with any plant, diversity is a good idea. If you eat too much of any one plant, it can potentially cause an accumulation of whatever natural pesticide or toxin that plant contains. So diversity is always a good rule of thumb, no matter what plant or what part of the plant it is. In zoos, the specialist herbivores are some of the hardest animals to feed. Gorillas, panda bears, things like that, because they have such a specialized digestive tract to detoxify and digest a specific plant, that switching them to other plants or other processed foods is very difficult. The easiest animals to feed are the carnivores, because you just feed them. Mammals are made up of pretty much the same stuff the world over: muscle, sinew, bone, fat, and it's the same building blocks. So if you're adapted to eating one type of mammal, you're adapted to eating the other types of mammal pretty much. There's a little bit of variation. And omnivores are fairly easy to feed too. So in terms of the plants diversity, and then I've read a few. I haven't gone deep into the difference between shelled seeds versus non-shelled. I would think that ones with shells, the evolutionary rationale I've seen is the ones with shells may be healthier because the defense budget, if you will, of the seed is being spent on the shell, not on toxins and poisons. Whereas seeds without the shell, their defense budget gets spent on toxins and poisons. But if you can also treat seeds in traditional ways. You can ferment them, you can soak them. Hunter-gatherers in California and elsewhere would get nuts and soak them for days, and it would leach out different problematic compounds, and then they would eat them. Almonds, you domesticate them, you flip one gene, they stop producing cyanide, and then they become nutritious. Because see, I mean, the reason why the plant defends seeds so much in part is because it's also put a lot of nutrients in there for the next generation. So you just got to think about getting past the plant's defenses. So soaking, sprouting, fermenting, shelled ones, diversity. That would be my answer. Final answer.
How's it going?
Good, how are you?
I'm awesome.
Great.
I've been awaiting for this moment for quite some time. But I will not. No, maybe
oh, right.
6
They didn't
days.
announce the schedule.
6 days.
Okay, 6 days.
So I will be very brief but succinct, and I think you can hear me very clearly.
Too late.
So first off, thank you very much for this presentation. I appreciate it very much so. And Nick, thanks for doing sound. All right. So I have a little write down. I'll be very brief.
Okay.
All right. Over the past 8 years, I've experimented with low-fat, high-carbohydrate diets, such as Pritkin, typical bodybuilding 6 small meals a day bullcrap, and the vegan diet. Eventually, I realized to strike the root of the issue is to work on my relationship with food. After several months of experimenting with reducing grains and sugar intake, I felt my relationship with food was healed because I became ready to begin with a strong commitment to whatever Malibu Mark Sisson tells me to do. In 8 months of strong commitment to a ketogenic paleo diet, I have lost 70 pounds of body fat and 13 inches off my waist. And I truly feel, look, and perform much better than as many others that do paleo, primal, hunter-gatherer, ancestral, ketogen, all that stuff. Right. So, on health benefits, I would say the complexion of my teeth has definitely improved, even though I brush 2 or 3 times a day. I rarely get blackheads and acne. My sleep has definitely improved, and etc. I feel the most incredible factor to my fat loss is that I did it with the least amount of exercise. I performed no planned cardio. I just put all that effort that I put in going to the gym or going to the track into my commitment with dietary commitment. And with that being said, I just do one brief high-intensity strength training workout every 6 to 10 days. I'm a certified personal trainer. Anybody has any questions, I have answers. And I'm a capitalist. All right.
Did you have a question?
Grain-free granola. It's from Providence, Rhode Island, and it's delicious and low in sugar. And here is my question. So if anyone here thinks this guy's a charlatan, he's not. He's not Harry Houdini.
You said you had a brief question, so ask your question.
All right, here we go. So here's my question. I had 40 grams of net carbohydrate yesterday, and I went to sleep last night around midnight. A few hours later, I woke up so I could just arrive here early. And I'm just curious if that net carbohydrate consumption carries over to today. I do not want to take myself out of ketosis because the accelerated fat loss is definitely helping. So should I have even lower amount of carbohydrates because my body doesn't know that?
I have no idea.
Try Google searching that or asking Gary Taubes because it's very difficult.
Well, to translate some of this, if you're doing a very low carb or zero carb diet, they refer to it as a ketogenic diet, where you're basically fueling yourself not off of dietary carbohydrate or glucose, but off of body fat or fats that you eat. It's actually been a very effective, for many people they find it effective for weight loss. It also has a lot of great effects on folks with different neurological disorders. People with Alzheimer's, autism, other epilepsy, they've found it to be quite effective. And for some people, you can stay in a ketogenic state, this fat-burning mode, even if you eat a certain low level of carbohydrate. And you basically have to figure out, to a certain extent, what that level is for you, how your body feels, and whether you kind of feel like your brain is switching over from one to the other. 40 grams is not a lot. So, and particularly if you've been a little bit active, it should go to your muscles pretty quickly and be stored as glycogen. So I would not worry about 40 grams of that at all.
Hi.
Wait, let me interrupt for a moment. I'm gonna do a quick little pitch for my book before people leave early. It's called the Paleo Manifesto. It comes out on September 17th. I have some note cards here with a description of the book that I'm going to pass around. If anybody would like to take one, that would be fabulous. Michael, if you could pass them around. And trying to get on the bestseller list the first week. And all the pre-orders up to that first week count towards the numbers for the bestseller list. So if anybody pre-orders a copy, I would be very grateful because it makes a big impact. I did not hear that.
I was just wondering if you could give us, like, not necessarily a typical day, but just like a day of food for you.
Yeah, a day of food. So this morning, for breakfast, I had 3 sunny side up eggs, a little bit of bacon, and a can of sardines. And then, hey, stop interrupting, please. And typically for lunch, I would have oftentimes I don't eat breakfast. I wake up, I don't feel hungry, and this is what happens when you have a more fat-based diet, is you don't get the cravings for sugar as much. It's actually very liberating to wake up and not immediately feel like you have to go get the waffles and syrup. And then for lunch, I'll often have something like a Cobb salad, some sort of salad with meat on it. A few different types of greens, some vegetables, and maybe a little bit of egg and avocado and a little bit of bacon or something like that. Or sushi. Of all the grains, rice I would consider to be the least bad. And white rice is just carbohydrate. So if you want more carbohydrate in your diet, eat some rice. There you go. We're not dogmatic here. So some in New York, I'll often go get some sushi for lunch, a little bit of seaweed salad, but just a salad with meat on it, if that's not available everywhere. For dinner, I will have some sort of protein, not just protein and fat, a piece of chicken, a burger patty. I'll buy some Applegate Farms hot dogs, so not the Oscar Mayer stuff, but a little bit higher quality. And a little bit healthier for you, and then some spinach on the side, or a little side salad, or a sweet potato. And on the sweet potato, yes, I'll put a spoonful of sour cream, or I'll put a little. If I'm making dinner for my nieces, I'll put a little butter on the vegetables. We need to get over. So that's sort of a typical day. But a big issue for people when they first go paleo or primal is they're still afraid of fat. We have just been lectured over and over and beaten on the head with a stick that fat makes you fat and that it's bad for you. And this is dangerously misguided. It's a shame that we use the same word, fat, to refer to the condition of being overweight. Because if we had switch the words for protein and fat, people would be like, oh no, don't eat protein, because protein, fat makes you fat. So, and the science around saturated fat in particular has been very poor for the last 60 or 70 years. One of the problems is it's very hard to run good studies on nutrition. Large numbers of people, well-controlled, long duration diet experiments are basically non-existent, because they're expensive. There are ethical issues, because if you actually want to monitor exactly what people are eating, you need to, if you want compliance, you basically have to go to a prison and study a prison population. And even then, you can't perfectly control it. So there's all sorts of issues with current diet studies, and what they're increasingly realizing is that not only is saturated fat not the devil, but it's actually beneficial. 40% of the fats in your body right now are saturated fats. Saturated fats are in the cell walls of every cell of your body. They coat the neurons in your brain. In human breast milk and in the breast milk of other mammals, about 40% of fats are saturated. Should we strip saturated fat out of human breast milk, out of some crazy idea that we know better than nature how to feed an infant? No, it's ridiculous. So don't get worried so much about saturated fat, but just try to eat it coming from whole foods and real foods and traditional foods rather than the ice cream cake at the store.
So it seems like the basis behind most of what you do is just basically you have a set of principles that you follow and you listen to your body after you use those principles. I think that's a great way to, and it probably would be the best way to actually alleviate most of the health problems in our country, and probably would be the best way to fix our healthcare crisis that we currently have. So I'm glad that you presented this the way that you did and you take that approach. I just have a simple question though. When it comes to eating meat, you definitely recommend a lot of meat, and I hear that, and I agree with it, and I'm just wondering why you think though that there's such a stigma with meat now, where so much of the general population looks at meat and the first thing they think of is heart disease and something that goes along with that, high cholesterol. And what do you say to people who look at you and say, you eat that much meat? And
It's a great question. A few points. First of all, there's this notion out there that paleo primal is you're eating like a carnivore, all meat, all raw, all the time, straight off the bone. And it's this cartoonish view of it. If take the word hunter and gatherer, we weren't just hunter and hunter, we were hunter and gatherer. We hunter-gatherers ate hundreds, some of them ate hundreds of plant species over the course of a year. So I eat meat, but I'm not a carnivore. I eat tons of plants. And the other day I was craving a bunch of vegetables, so I went over to the grocery store and just got a big salad. And so, first of all, have sort of balance in your diet. I get the bulk of my calories from animal foods and seafood. Usually, when I'm at home and cooking for myself, the physical bulk of my diet is actually more plants. But plants are just so calorically not dense that you can eat a lot more of them. Then in terms of reasons for why we've moved to this default position where eating animals is unhealthy, the first issue is that saturated fat and fat became demonized in terms of heart disease 50, 60, 70, 80 years ago. And people get a lot of animal fats and saturated fat from animal products. And the alternative that the health authorities pushed was carbohydrate. And you get carbohydrate from plant products. So the fact that fat bore the brunt of criticism also meant that animals got lumped in there as well. And then another issue is that the food movement to date has been heavily dominated by plant-based diet and vegetarian folks who have ethical and environmental and ideological reasons for the stances that they hold, which is fine. They're free to do that. But the problem is that a lot of these ethical and ideological positions that sometimes can be sort of religious in nature seep into mainstream diet advice. And lots of vegans and vegetarians, I have no problem with anyone who wants to eat vegan and vegetarian. And in fact, paleo folks and anyone who's a conscious eater, we have more in common with each other in many ways than with the average eater in the Western world. The problem is that when somebody turns around and takes their ideology and says this is the optimal way for a human being to eat, which is just blatantly false. And so, for example, I'll quickly finish this anecdote. In the early 90s, there's a group called the Center for Science and the Public Interest. And it was founded by two Ralph Nader guys, two longtime vegetarians. And they hated saturated fat. And so they were criticizing all the fast food companies for cooking French fries in beef tallow, in beef fat. And it was 93% beef tallow and 7% cottonseed oil. And so they lobbied with other groups, with other mainstream health authorities, to force McDonald's and all the fast food companies to switch to cooking their fries in partially hydrogenated vegetable oils, which we now know are terrible for you. And those partially hydrogenated vegetable oils had unnatural artificial trans fats in them. So they literally said, switch from this fat that human beings have been eating for eons and go to this new fat that we make in a factory out of vegetables, because somehow, like, just because it's a vegetable makes it healthy, and cook in it and made French fries less healthy. I advocate for McDonald's to return to cooking its French fries in real beef tallow, and it would be healthier for people. Because saturated fat doesn't oxidize easily at high temperatures. It's stable at high temperatures, which is a virtue when you're cooking food. It doesn't react with oxygen. So it's another area where sort of this vegetarian ideologues pushed their agenda in concert with mainstream health authorities to the detriment of most people's health. Last question.
Okay.
But I'll be around after to take more.
Yesterday we talked about this singularity with Perry Metzger, and you were there, and we were talking about.
I slept through it. No, it was a great talk.
Right, and yeah, and we were talking about evolution into the future and
robots.
Robots. I was wondering what your thoughts would be about evolution and whether it is a rising tide or one thing.
What do you mean by a rising tide or one thing?
All right. What I mean is, do you believe that that as we gain more knowledge about the human body, that our diets will have to reflect that, or should we continue to look to the past and Paleolithic or whatever?
So it's a good question. How do you integrate new science, new advances, new technology into this ancient way of eating? The way that I go about it is my general dietary recommendations are based on the real old stuff. Looking at hunter-gatherer diets, incorporating ancient culinary wisdom, avoiding industrial processed foods. But at that point, you have to experiment. You need to essentially become a hacker of your own body and run little n=1 experiments to see what works for you. And there are novel foods that are healthy, and there are foods that were around in the Paleolithic that are unhealthy. And at that point, you need to see what works for you. However, I'm very skeptical that there's this company called Soylent, which just raised about $200,000 to make a shake. What a terrible name. Only a techie could come up with a name that bad. Soylent. And it's everything you need in one shake. Well, I'm all for people experimenting and see if this is going to work, but it's a little bit hubristic to think that a couple of software engineers on their first try are just going to be like, oh, we replaced the need for all food ever. Game over. We're done. They're going to leave stuff out. They're going to realize that certain hormones or bacteria are missing and things like that. So I think self-experimentation is good, but I'm a little bit skeptical of ideas to re-engineer food. Thank you very much. The Paleo Manifesto for pre-order right now on Amazon and elsewhere, also available on Kindle. So if you like what you heard, pick it up. There's all sorts of interesting stuff in there beyond just food and diet. So thanks very much.
Excitement builds on election day. Results come pouring in. A landslide victory for the underdog. A proud and glorious win.